there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to make a one-layer card using my new stamp set from Rubber Stamps Tapestry called Fireside Christmas. We're also using trinkets and wishes, and we're going to use some of the brand new peg stamps that were just released from Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them online at pegstamps.com. We're also going to be coloring with alcohol pens. These are the Studio 71 brand, but you can use whatever you have, and you're going to want some dye-based ink like Memento if you're coloring with alcohol pens, because it won't bleed. You'll also want some other dye-based inks for coloring or stamping in some of the images that don't need to be colored, and some blending brushes because it's really easy to use them to spread your ink around. You can also have some sponge daubers if you prefer, or in addition. I'm starting off by stamping the largest element here, which is the fireplace, and I'm using black Memento ink, and I've got it centered probably in the bottom half of the card. You just want to make sure you're going to have room for all of your other elements. And this card I'm stamping on is 4.5 by 6.5 inches wide, and it's going to be glued onto a 5 by 7 card base. I'm stamping the fire in the little kind of opening in the hearth, and you could also stamp other things in the opening if you didn't want to do the fire. That's why it's separate. You could do candles in there, you could do any other little scenes that you want to do. It's completely up to your own imagination. Something I really liked about this set was the border here, the garland. It's done in 2 pieces. That will allow you to use this as a frame for your card if you wanted to, or to make a little box to put your address or return address in. I just think it's really versatile because you can make a box whatever size you want because you have the corners. Now I'm stamping on some Christmas ornaments onto the garland because I think that's a really pretty look. I love it when I see hearths that have the garland and tons of Christmas balls. I think it's so festive. And in fact, I think I'm going to do that to my hearth this year because it's such a pretty look. And if you're interested, I do have some Christmas hearth decorating videos on my YouTube channel. I decided to use a variety of colors here for the Christmas balls, gold and blue and red, and I did use a green for that bell, but I wish I used a different color because it did kind of disappear once I added in more garland features. I'm stamping a large frame over the hearth, and this could be a mirror, or you could actually stamp a little peg stamp scene in there, but I think it's a really excellent place to put a sentiment, so that's what I was thinking here. I personally love a mirror over a hearth because it can make a small room look a lot bigger, and I have a small living room, so that's what I do over my hearth. I'm using the Sentiment Deck the Halls from the Trinkets and Wishes set. Now that clear stamp set is so handy because it has so many Christmas sentiments in a variety of sizes and layouts, so you can really use that on any of your holiday cards and get just the right size sentiment for your project. Now, something you're going to want to do when you are building a scene is to think about whether the object you're stamping is in front of or behind something else. So basically you're stamping the things in front first, and then you're stamping the things in behind after. And you could put a scrap of paper or a post-it note or anything down to protect those things that you want to have in front, like I did there with that bell. So when I was putting those candles in, I knew I wanted them nestled behind the garland, so I just stuck a post-it note down and then stamped on top of that, and it worked out really well, and I didn't need to cut any complicated masks. Now I'm using this sprig of evergreen here just to fill in my garland a little bit more. It's nice to do that after you put the balls in, that way you know what sort of space you have remaining. Now it's time to do our coloring, and I'm using some alcohol pens. I've got 3 different shades of brown, and what I do when I get a set of markers is I swatch them all out, and that way I have a correct representation of what my colors are going to look like. And to make sure I swatch that out on the paper that I typically use for coloring. And the paper I use is Neenah Classic Crest. I get the 80-pound cardstock in the super smooth finish, and it works really well for markers. It makes it blend so much easier than other cardstocks. And then you have that nice cardstock weight. I use the same colors on the frame above the hearth, and that gives me a little bit of unity in my picture. So I try to repurpose the colors whenever I can, and it does make your card seem a little more cohesive and harmonious. For the logs, I use some darker browns, but I will pull in some of those lighter browns as well, and that just makes everything, have a little bit of contrast, but also tie together. Now I'm coloring the stones in with a nice kind of light, warm, stony gray color, and I'm going around the edges with a slightly darker gray, and that's just giving it a little bit of a roundness to it. Now I didn't have a gray that I needed in that set, so I grabbed a darker gray from another set that I had, and I went in and just kind of dabbed in the corners where the rocks meet, because you have a little bit of a gap there, and I thought that would give it some nice depth. Then I scribbled that dark marker onto an acrylic block, and I used it as a palette to pick up some of that darker color with my medium color gray, and then I could use that for shading, which worked out really well. Now I'm coloring the flame with a light yellow, then going with a medium orange and then a darker orange to get that depth that I want, just so you have a nice rich color to the flames. And for some highlights on the stones, I'm stippling in, which just means to dot gently with a white gel pen, and that gives me a little bit of texture and highlight and interest. I decided I want my sentiment mirror to be a mirror, or frame to be a mirror, I should say, and I just streaked in some light blue ink, and I had to be really careful because I wasn't sure if that dye ink I was using was going to bleed with my markers or not. Luckily, it was fine, but most dye inks will work pretty well with your alcohol markers because they have a different binder in them. Now I'm using a sponge dauber to stencil in this floral pattern for the background because I want it to look like wallpaper. I love the look of wallpaper, especially in like a scene where it's supposed to look a little more traditional, like this fireside hearth here. And I thought that pattern was really pretty, and it was small enough in scale to work on a card. And then I'm using my ink brushes, and I am just using that same colored ink and brushing over an all over color. And I like to do the brushes over a sponged stencil design because it's going to give us that pretty tone on tone look, and it's not going to overpower the design that we sponged on with our stencil. So that's kind of how I like to do it. If I'm covering a large area and I want it to be smooth, I like the brushes because they seem to just give me a much smoother look. Now I'm doing a direct to paper technique where I take my ink cube and I just swoosh it across the bottom of my card here, and I protected my hearth and the wallpaper area with a post-it note, and I was going for the look of hardwood floors, which I think looks pretty good. And now I'm gluing that right down to my card base using a permanent glue stick, and this is the Avery permanent glue stick, which is probably the only glue stick I'll trust not to fall apart when I am making a card, because if you use another glue stick that's not so permanent, and your card falls apart in the mail, and your person opens it up and they've got a bazillion pieces to put together, then you got to tell them that you sent them a Christmas activity and not a Christmas card, so you kind of save your face a little bit there. For the inside of the card, since I did glue it on a craft card base, I wanted to have a nice light area to write on, so I just stamped the little stocking from Fireside Christmas and some of the presents and star from Trinkets and Wishes, and then I colored them with my alcohol pens. I used a pink, a red, and a burgundy to get that pretty shadow color, just that nice blend. And then I did add a little bit of gold onto that star to make it stand out a little bit. Now, as you know, I've mentioned in other videos, I like to make my cards reusable. So I just adhered this panel into the middle of my card using some washi tape so it can be completely removed if somebody wants to reuse the card for someone else. I have no problem with that. I think it's a great idea. Now, my candles didn't seem to stand out after taking another look at the front of my card, so I colored them in with my red marker and then added some highlights with that white gel pen. A white gel pen is a great addition to your marker stash because it can pull out those bright white highlights that would be really difficult to color around. And then upon looking at my card front again, I realized that the garland looked a little too wispy and sparse, so I'm just using a light green marker and filling it in. It's lighter than the stamping ink, so you can still see the detail from our stamp design. And I also added a little shadow at the bottom of the floor under the hearth to make it pop a little bit more. And there you have it. This was so much fun to make, and I love these stamps from Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find these stamps at pegstamps.com, and I will have everything linked below in the video description. Please give me a thumbs up if you like this before you go, and until next time, happy crafting!